Hi, welcome to another episode of Coffee with Mirko, the podcast series where we talk with coffee professionals and known, and we just like to discuss different topics. And every time we have different guests. If you're new, I'd love for you to share this with a friend, with someone who cares, with someone who loves coffee. You can take a screenshot and share this with those coffee friends of yours. Making myself a cup of coffee whilst we wait for our next guest. This episode is a lot about coffee science, so it's going to be a pretty exciting one. So yeah, make yourself a cup of coffee, make yourself comfortable, and we'll be ready real soon. All right. And to everyone, just to start, I hope you're safe, I hope you're well, and especially if you are a fellow Melburnian, the latest news could be seen quite negative, could be seen quite distressful, but we're here, try to give a little bit of a bright start of the day, especially if you're in Melbourne. But I'm gonna invite Christopher right now. Here we go. Peter, you're funny. And here he is. He's just tuned in, so here we go. Good evening.
Hey, we've done it.
We've done it. You did it.
We're here. This is my first time going Instagram live.
Yes. I'm glad. And thank you very much for coming in. I know it's Sunday over there, and I'm sure you busy on a lot of you guys are. And thank you. I really appreciate your time and effort to come on this live stream. And how are you and your family doing?
Oh, everything's good. I'm in Eugene, Oregon. It's a pretty low population density area, so we haven't really had that much we haven't had too many problems. The undergraduates actually have left for the summer, so that's pretty standard here, and that means that the population has gone down a lot. And so things are pretty good. My family is going well. Well, you've joined me here. My cats, every time I do anything, they fall asleep on the bed behind me. So everything's great. How are you?
Yeah, good. I think it's just important to address, obviously, if people are following us from Melbourne, just sending out a bit of love and positivity, because the new stage 4 lockdown in today, even though we haven't had it as bad as the States and other areas, but just sending out some positivity. But no, I'm well. I can't complain. I got a roof, I got a cup of coffee, and I'm here. So I really can't complain. I'm not cats, but other than them, same as you, mate. First and foremost, Chris or Christopher? Because
either. Chris is fine.
Chris is fine. Well, Peter Gallego just said huge Christopher Hendon fan. So. We got a huge fan in the house. And before we get started, a gentleman by the name of Maxwell said to say hi to you.
Oh yeah. So I was just listening to his podcast he did with you, actually.
There you go. I messaged him yesterday, and he's like, "Yeah, say hi." But Chris, could you kindly tell us about how you started your coffee journey? And just give some context to the audience in terms of what are you doing now at the moment?
Yeah, so, I was a coffee consumer, perhaps a relatively naive coffee consumer, up until about 2014. I actually did my undergraduate studies in Australia. And so despite being surrounded by, at around 2010, that was a good time for coffee. It was right when things were turning up, But I was not an interested coffee consumer back then. So I transitioned to enjoying coffee when I moved to England. And that's actually where Maxwell and I met, was in his cafe. And he really spent time talking to me about coffee and explaining to me the nuances, the things that you all take for granted, like you just know this stuff. For us, when we're not in the industry, and I really think I am part of the industry now, but
you are.
I was definitely not when I started. So, even just language like washed and natural, and even understanding that coffee came from farms. Like I just had no idea, right? So Maxwell taught me all about that. And then we started to talk about problems that were existing that were preventing people from understanding and speaking the same language. A good example of that was the water chemistry problem that I heard you discuss with Maxwell a couple podcasts ago. But that was just one of many. I mean, as we all know in coffee, there's so many things to consider in coffee that science could really contribute to. And at the time, it's also worth pointing out that I was also just a young graduate student. I really had no perception or understanding, or couldn't contextualize chemistry and coffee and in a bigger picture of the value of that. So really the progression came from starting out in the competition scene and seeing that, with Maxwell, who was both a really good communicator in coffee, but also in science. And then seeing that his impact just within the coffee community, which is not a small community, was really valuable. I thought, well, there's no reason I couldn't do the same thing, but the other way around, and take coffee to the academic community and make this a really impactful sort of, we call it a broader impact. So basically in science, people look for us to do something beyond our job, not just teaching, not just research, but something else, something that really makes people understand that science is around you every day. And this coffee one is really good. This is this is probably the best thing that happened. Probably the best thing that happened to me was getting involved this way.
Which is fantastic, and I love what you and obviously Maxwell did, and something that without going to through the questions yet, but it's amazing because a lot of people ask, how can we improve specialty coffee? How can we grow it? How can we get the message out there? And oftentimes the guest and myself, keep repeating the same message. It's all about those one-on-one conversations. Right. And if you didn't have that one-on-one conversation with Maxwell, I don't know, maybe you wouldn't have done the studies that you've done around. Maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't. I think it really does start with that conversation.
Oh, I really don't think I would have gone this path, really. I think when people think about what we've done in coffee, there's obviously tangible things like pointing at the water stuff and the grinding stuff and whatever. It doesn't even matter what we've done. But what we've done, if you were to not be in the coffee industry and look at this externally from just general public or science perspective, what we've done is something that's really amazing. We've managed to get people in coffee to speak the same language as we do in the scientific community. And I've got the scientific community speaking the same language now they do in the coffee community. And so now we've got two huge bodies of people that are now integrating with one another, and we've really achieved. I mean, this is really, and I'm not the only person who did this. I'm just saying I'm part of this. I'm really pleased to be part of it. It's actually amazing. And anyone listening, because I suspect most people on your podcast are tuning in right now are probably in the coffee industry. The fact that you're even listening at all to this is already amazing. That is
100%.
It's incredible.
100%. And it's incredible how water, such a big ingredient when it comes to coffee, and many of us, even many people who are following or who are listening at the podcast later on when it's going to be published, we often just neglected it. Why do you think that we did that? How absurd. It's crazy thinking about it now, obviously. It's easy to say, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, oh, totally. Because the problem was always one of communication, right? It was that a science that, basically we teach all of the chemistry that is in water for coffee in the first year of undergraduate studies at uni. No, that's just normal Gen Chem. That doesn't mean that's known or not valuable. In fact, I would argue quite the opposite. There's a reason we teach it year one, because it's the most important thing in chemistry. And, I actually teach that class now at Oregon. But why I'm so excited about it is because we managed to just teach general chemistry to I don't even know, 1 million people. I don't even know how many people we're talking about, right? But it's a lot of people, and I mean that's a tremendous success. So we're really happy about that. And I think part of the reason that it took off so well is because you had Maxwell, who's a great ambassador for coffee and is really good at communicating. He's easy to watch. Everyone likes listening to him. And then I've been working for years on science communication. I'm by no means an expert, but I work really hard at that. And I think there's a little bit of a payoff making sure that you can communicate very complicated ideas in a way that people understand.
Yeah, which you did actually when you came for the knowledge talks with Toby's Estate. I used to work for them, and I literally quit a few months before you came for that talk. So, even the fact that you've been traveling around the world to talk about this, it's incredible. And before getting to the next question, Carlos saying, waiting for the second version of Water for Coffee book. So we'll go there. And he's also saying, to give some context, that he's a PhD student working in computational chemistry.
Well, Carlos, you and I are both waiting for that thing. So let me tell you the reality. I got really busy with the new job of being an assistant professor. And one of the things they ask you to do is write proposals to raise research money so you can have more graduate students. And that takes a lot of time and a lot of intellectual energy. And at the same time, we've had COVID and all these things that have drained all of us. And so, I really I honestly had planned to put a lot more effort into that. And it just really it's not coming out as naturally as I would have hoped. And so I really overhauled chapter 1, 2, and 3. They're completely different, but there are still 11 more chapters. And, I just don't see the end of the tunnel in this thing yet, but I'll give you a couple of updates. One is I pitched the book to a legitimate publisher. So there's a chance that book will get picked up by a very large publisher, which means that you'll see that book potentially see the book in everywhere.
It's fantastic.
We're working on that. I don't know what that's going to mean for the content, but I do want to comment on the content. The reason we stopped printing it was, one, it was very expensive and it was taking a lot of our time. But two, we really didn't make that much money. We just distributed a tremendous amount of books. But two is that I made some scientific mistakes in there, and the mistakes in science are part of science, But the next part of science is correcting the mistakes, and it takes time to make sure you don't make the same mistake twice or a new variation of. And so I did make mistakes. One of the mistakes I made was I mixed up some of the language related to general hardness versus carbonate hardness versus temporary hardness. So I want to be rid of all of that, because that's just more words that mean less. And I'm all about less words that mean more. So that was the problem for there. And then there's another area that I made a mistake relating. I tried to give water as an example of an ideal gas, and it's definitely not. It's, in fact, the textbook definition of not an ideal gas. And, just like oversights. So that's what slowed the whole thing down. And, now I feel maybe like I'm maybe too much of a perfectionist, and I want this thing to be perfect. So here we are.
Which I think perfectionism and science sort of, it's an endless chase, I'm assuming.
Yeah. I need to finish it. Look, the world wants that book. Well, I don't know about the whole world, but somebody wants, at least one person on this call wants that book. So one is more than zero, and I should get it done. I'm sorry it's not done.
No, it's okay. And I think taking your time, and you're also managing a whole bunch of other things. And Peter on the chat is asking, what are the pros and cons of freezing coffee in the wrong bags and then taking it out and then refreezing?
Yeah. So this is one of the hardest things. Basically, if you put something in the freezer, you're obviously going to condense water onto the surface of this thing, right? And you're going to also have water being liberated. It's complicated about the actual processes that occur at the interface. But the important point is that when you're in the freezer, all the water in principle that's in the air will freeze. And so as a point there, that means that though I always say the freezer is wet because there's a lot of water in the freezer, but it's not wet in the atmosphere. It's just wet inside the freezer. But as it turns out, if you pull it out of the freezer, there's way more humidity. So when you open it up, the humidity will condense on the surface of the cold bean, and you get little ice crystallites. So it's not a big deal, okay, if you do it once, because then it'll just go away again. But if you keep doing it back and forth, there is a chance you end up with a fair bit of water in there. Maybe you'll be able to visually see an ice crystal or something after, a month or so of in and out. That's why those devices, I think James Hoffman just reviewed all of the storage devices that, that can remove all of the headspace. And I know that there's companies that are freezing individual doses, and that's not related to the question you asked, but I know people are doing this. But typically what I'd recommend is, coffee bag of coffee in my house lasts a week, standard bag. And I only ever have one open because I don't know. I'm a very linear person. I drink this bag, then I drink the next bag. I don't know. So, yeah. So when I freeze coffee, I put it in the freezer. I pull out a bag when I'm ready to use it, and I just use it from that day on. It sits on the counter from that day on. And I've never seen anything negative with that. But I'm not pulling out a geisha and drinking a whole bag of geisha the whole week. I understand there's certain coffees that you want to have a once in a while experience. And honestly, my recommendation for you is if you really have a coffee that you value like that, you should take the time and individually package it. It's not, that's a real pain to conclude, but otherwise you're may as well just pull it out and drink the whole thing.
Yeah, and I think you were also on the podcast of a couple of cats like Kirk and Todd. They definitely are big advocates of the freezing bar. So, and also the single dose there. But yeah, thanks for answering that question. And going back on the second version of your book, Carlos gave you a little bit of leeway saying great things take their time. So,
yeah, or at least or just things take their time.
And Anthony from Brew Theory just said that he's the second person who would love interest in that book. So you got two people. There you go.
Good, two. All right, it's worth
greater than one. Two is greater than one. So you talked a bit about the students and about the book, so just out of curiosity, going back on water, and that's such a big component in the cup of coffee. How do you make your students excited about water, and how can we use the same kind of approach that you use with your students with home brewers to get excited about it?
Yeah, so this is an interesting question. So basically, in order to really appreciate the power of water, you just need to brew 2 cups exactly the same and taste them side by side. And even a novice coffee consumer will can taste the difference big time. And if you wanted to do it at home, you wouldn't even need to get fancy and have salts and stuff. You could just buy Evian, and you could buy basically any other water, and Evian's really hard and everything else is way less hard. And so, you do that, you get people excited by the difference. But chemically, it's really complicated to tell what's really going on. I say it's the buffer. I say all these words that try and help you understand what's going on. But even my work, and certainly work from like Shahan Yuretzian and in Zurich, in the Technical University of Zurich, and many others have told me on numerous occasions that when they try and do the chemical analyses, they can't really see anything different. And we know that the water is doing something. So, I'm largely theoretical and I can explain what you're tasting, but then we do the chemical analysis, we can't tell the difference. And so that's actually not the way I motivate students. I don't want to motivate them by saying there's a chemical difference. I want to motivate them by the curiosity of, look what chemistry can do. And, if they buy into it, then that's great. But, actually I really don't motivate the students with the water stuff anymore. I think, it's not like it's a solved problem, but from my perspective, we worked on it until about 2016. And I know that doesn't sound like that long ago, but in science, 4 years is a really long time. Because, I've spent 4 years doing other things. We did the freezing thing that people are talking about here. And we had that new paper that everyone, it was a pre-COVID paper. I don't know if you remember this, but about the really fast shots. And that thing really that took off, and that was 2.5 years of work. So
Wow.
we've kind of moved on from the water. I don't mean it in a negative way at all, because I love the water. Without the water, I wouldn't be interested in coffee. Okay, so it's just that we've sort of had to diversify our interests a little bit.
Yeah, and I appreciate it, and I think I was actually pretty lucky to have experienced such two different countries when it comes to water, because my where I come from, my village, it sounds naive, but literally the mountains are there watching you, and like they're just like, it's some water, and even from the tap, it's delicious. And every time I used to go in a big city, even in Italy, it's not complaining about Australia, I couldn't drink it because the taste of chlorine was so overwhelming. But that's just with water. And I remember my partner was like, could not understand the difference. Like, what do you mean you don't like this water? Why do you need this Brita filter? I was like, I can't drink it. It just feels like I'm drinking some chemical drink beverage. So I think I was lucky in that regards. And this is just a bit of a selfish question, but while we're on the topic, I remember a couple of years ago, I went back home for a bit of visits, and I was a little bit concerned about coffee, because especially where I am is, still quite the, first wave, and I don't do too super well with bitterness. Anyway, coffee was a bit of a challenge for most of that holiday. But then we went hiking, and it was like 6 o'clock in the morning, went quite high up, and at one stage, my friend, who is also an alpinist, a professional alpinist, has said, we got to stop at this little chalet and get a shot of espresso before we go for the big, for the next big hill. And I was like, fuck it. It's 6 o'clock in the morning. Done. Who cares? Let's go. And I walked in, and I was like, a little bit snobbing me, looking at the machine at the ground. I was like, oh, fuck. Here we go. This is going to be horrible.
Yeah.
It wasn't.
Yeah.
It really wasn't. And I knew that it wasn't the coffee beans. And I was like, why? And then throughout the whole walk, I was like, is it because of the water? Like, I really, and we can't, obviously we can't answer that.
You never know. Yeah.
But I thought it was quite interesting how maybe the water, because it was so.
It's funny. Those good coffee experiences, when you're out and you have one, and it's in a place you definitely thought was probably not going to be the best coffee experience, they can really surprise you. I think they're part of the reason why coffee's so fun, because you end up maybe in a cafe or a chalet, like you said, or who knows where, and next thing you know, you're having a really. I bet you I could almost tell you the flavor profile of that shot of espresso, though, because the really memorable ones that are really good are like chocolate, sweetness, honey, graham cracker, almost always. I've never really had one that surprised me, and it was like a structured washed Kenyan. Very rarely do you go into a shop that you're not expecting and you get a crazy bright sparkling acidity thing. But I'll tell you what I've been doing. You actually just reminded me. So we've been here in Oregon. It's very popular to have a so-called drive-through cafe. There's like these little shacks. They're tiny. They couldn't be. I don't know, they're like 2 meters wide by 5 meters long. And, it's just some person sitting in a shack, and you drive up there and order something. So I thought, no way would I ever go in these things. Okay, so I've decided, since COVID has happened, that I'm going to try all of them. I can tell you conclusively that they are, at least in my neighborhood, they are terrible. Every single one of them. I have not had the chalet experience that you've had. But the worst one came out of a drive-through cafe that was part of a Mexican restaurant, and that was really something. It's incredible what passes as espresso, and I know I already pushed the limits on what people call espresso, but this is really taking it to another level.
Well, yeah.
I hope this doesn't happen, and I hope this doesn't happen where you are.
We have a few drive-through, usually the shipping containers, and
that's already cool, though. That's cool. It's in a container.
Yeah, I remember there was one when I was working back at for this coffee roaster, and someone asked for an inquiry, and I went there, and I actually thought it was cool, because it was like this shipping container. It was all blacked out, and it was called Black Box or something like that, and it just makes so much sense already. Yeah, it was interesting, and they were using pretty already high quality coffee, so it's interesting, 100%. And which just raised a bit of a question that I got for you, a bit of a challenging question that popped in my head. You know, you were talking about those experiences that we have out of the blue. We're like, okay, coffee here is not, it's not going to be good.
Yeah.
You know, obviously science is a big component for you. I get it, but you're not just science. You're also made out of bones and, you know, muscle and, you know, still human. How much is the emotional experience within that cup of coffee impacts almost psychologically, I'm not sure, onto flavor? So, you know, we all had those bad experiences in first world problems category of the shop is too cold or too hot, service is not great, you waited 30 minutes for a cup of coffee, and then you're like, oh, coffee is all right. But then you had experiences where everything just worked out perfectly, and maybe you are sitting across from a friend that you haven't seen in 2 years and you're having such a good time. How much do you think there's also an element of the actual experience, even though it's not obviously scientific?
Yeah. So for sure. I mean, it's like, you know, it's pretty common in the United States to have, go to a restaurant or a diner or something like this and have a cup of coffee that's, you know, been made on a bun batchy, and you're going to sit down, or, you know, some sort of batch brewery, and you're going to sit down and you're going to get poured a cup of coffee or something that was seemingly related to a cup of coffee. That product that lands on the table with the type of service that you're going to get in a place like that, which is often very good. And I mean, that's a good cup of coffee. And it doesn't have any of the flavor characteristics you'll find on any flavor wheel. Okay. It's a totally different thing. In fact, I would almost argue that, like, you know, it's only specialty coffee that really goes from like being super great to super terrible. Like, the window for, because you're expecting all these things with specialty coffee. You're expecting this service and this flavor profile and all this stuff. But if you go into a cafe that's not trying to do any of that and is just trying to, you know, or a restaurant or whatever, then you're going to have a good experience, and the margin for error there is not as big. Now, having said that, scientifically, oftentimes, even if you're enjoying that cup of coffee, if you were to really line it up on a cupping table blind, it probably wouldn't score that well compared to, you know, a coffee that was really great. So your brain plays a huge role, and the environment and all that plays a huge role in this stuff. And I actually, you know, a lot of you kind of pointed at something that's like, in our most recent paper, I tried really, really hard to make sure that people knew that I was not saying, like, trying to homogenize a flavor profile. Like, I was not trying to tell people what tasted good. That's still always going to be dependent on all the things you sort of offered just before. We were trying really hard just to make sure that whatever the flavor profile was, that the barista or the restaurant or the cafe, wherever, it doesn't matter where you are, your home, whatever that flavor profile is you're trying to achieve, we just want to make sure that you can find a way to get it and then get it again the next time you brew the same coffee. And, you know, if you don't want that consistency, that's cool too. You know, that's just the part of the fun. It's the variability that makes the whole coffee industry tick. I think that's actually why I like it so much.
100%. And I think what you just said is just actually it was going to be the next question around consistency. And we go there in a second. I think that maybe we just cracked the code. I think that when we go out, we should just always expect the worst out of a cup of coffee. Well, and you're right, because it's so true. I have done that mistake of walking into a shop. I look at the shelf, I'm like, oh, they're using this coffee, it's going to be great. And then it's like, oh, actually, it was pretty average. But then I went to the mountains expecting the worst, and it was actually, you know, it was like, oh, yeah, that's actually quite good.
I don't know if you want to go into a shop expecting a bad experience. You know, I know what you mean. I know what you mean, right? But I don't know. Like, when I'm going out for coffee, the only thing I'm expecting when I'm going out is the fact that I'm not going to have to make that coffee. Someone else is going to. I'm paying someone else to do that for me, and so it's already a luxury because it's something that. And so for me, it's just like more like going in and just being grateful for the experience that you have. We all have the opportunity, and in fact, actually touches on another good point, is that that's part of the reason, I get asked in the scientific community why I work in coffee rather than beer and wine and whiskey and, whatever, because those are somehow, higher profile or whatever. But part of the reason why coffee is so good is because the economic barrier to entry is pretty low. So if you're from a region or your family, or you don't earn very much money, you can still share the same sensory experience as the richest guy down the street. It brings people together and on a level that, it's a level playing field, and, for a couple of bucks. And I know that even for some people, a couple of bucks is a lot of money. But the point is that it's much lower than, for example, going out and having a specialty glass of wine. But nonetheless, you still feel grateful when someone else makes it for you.
That is such a good point. That is such a good point. I actually never thought about it in those terms, as far as you said, in terms of that it's accessible. You're right. Obviously with all, consequences around pricing that should be higher and whatnot, it's a big conversation. But I think you're right in terms of everyone can have a cup of coffee, or most people can. And yes, and that's why, in fact, I used to, before COVID, never brew at home, because for me it was all about supporting my local shops or wherever I go and drink it. Because you're right, having that full experience of saying, hey, here's my $4 Australian dollars to get me a beautiful double espresso, because I don't have an espresso machine. I just go my AeroPress. And then COVID hit, and I started to look at, I'm gonna start brewing at home. And one of our guests, Daniel Hobart, said that in his opinion, a bit cheekily, but the fourth way of coffee is going to be home brewing, which brings me to the consistency point of, it's so important, consistency across shops, because it's a business, but also for the experience, like you just said.
Yeah,
how can a person always have the same cup of coffee? So what can someone at home do to try to aim for that consistency?
Well, the easiest thing that, I would say I make a lot of coffee at home that was probably not that good, but perhaps maybe my barrier for good and your barrier for good are not equal. So it's hard to describe what I mean by that, but I make a lot of coffee at home now, partially because of COVID, partially, because just what you do in America, I guess, in a small town. So, you get the idea. So anyway, what I realized when I was doing all this hard work was that water is a big deal, okay? And there are products that exist on the market to solve this problem. So let's assume that you could solve your water problem somehow. Then you have the heating of the water, which is the kettle of some description. That's not worth thinking about. You just heat it up, okay? So there's that. So then there's the brew method. And I realized after doing this for a long time that I really just like reproducible brew methods. Honestly, I want to be able to do the same thing 100 times in a row. And that, for me, that's the AeroPress. So, for me, it gives you a cloudy cup of coffee. So you got to deal with the fact that it's not as clear and clean as you might get out of a pour over. But honestly, I bet you one of my AeroPresses, okay, how do I put this? 10 of my AeroPresses are always going to be good, and only one of my pour overs will be good. So, that's the sort of ratio that I would go for. In terms of, but actually brewing at home, your grinder matters way more than I thought. That is the big thing. And you don't even need to spend a lot of money to get to the stage where it's acceptable. It's just, I know that just talking about how barrier for entry in coffee is only a couple of bucks, but actually at home, it's more like $200 total for the whole setup. But you really need to drop a little bit of money on that grinder, in the vicinity of $100 plus or minus a bit, because otherwise you're just gonna garbage in, garbage out. That's unfortunately what the reality is here.
Yeah, and in fact, grind size and grinding was actually two questions I had 100%, and it's super important. I think that the AeroPress, just briefly touching base on that. That's the exact reason why I got it. First, it's quite economically viable, because it's not like you're spending $7,000 or $8,000 on an espresso machine. And like you said, it's just there's not much thinking. Like I can wake up in the morning and without too much thinking, I just can make that cup of coffee.
Right,
Speaking of which, I
right.
just ran out of paper filters, so I'm using my metal filter, and I've noticed such an incredible difference. But we just walked past through the halfway mark, and I have a ritual out-of-the-box question for you, Christopher. I'm really interested in asking that to you, actually. If you could, who would you like to have dinner with? And it doesn't have to be in coffee; it could be anyone.
Do they have to be alive?
Nope.
That's a hard question to answer. So there are a few people on that are alive that I'd be interested in. One of them, well, hold on. I first want to preface this with that the reasons that I would choose to have dinner with somebody are vast. They span a tremendous range of motivations. So some of them may be scientific, some of them may be to challenge the person because I so adamantly disagree with things that they say. So I'll need to think carefully about which one I'm referring to here. But James May is a ex-host of Top Gear. He's got the longer gray hair. I've heard that not everything about his personality is great, but the guy seems to have broad interests in history, science, knows a fair bit about cars, this sort of thing. And I suspect that he would just have an interesting, the night would take an interesting trajectory. Let's put it that way. There's a variety of people in coffee. I don't really know in coffee who I'd have dinner with. I need to think carefully about that. You've kind of caught me off guard on the dinner one. Yeah, I think what I'm doing is I'm thinking about who I've had dinner with that was really a really special dinner that I really felt like was really something. And oftentimes those are usually with coffee roasters who are sharing stories about crazy things that have happened, from anything ranging from roasting a live piece of ammunition that found its way into the coffee bag all the way to, all sorts of stuff. Opening a bag and finding little individually wrapped pieces of, cocaine, all sorts of things. So, these stories are always fun. But, let's see. I think in science, there's a few really big-time superstars that would have been interesting to have dinner with. And one of them would be Linus Pauling. He's a 2-time Nobel laureate, one for his chemistry and one in peace for denuclearization. I think that Linus Pauling would have been a very curious person to have dinner with. I think Marie Curie, 2-time Nobel laureate, one in physics, one in chemistry. And she was obviously a superstar, but also was one of these people who gave their life for their job. She basically handled radioactive materials knowing it was hurting, and that's you want to learn what pushes that sort of person to do what they're doing. So, yeah.
Cool, thank you. I appreciate it. I think it's just one of those questions that the whole point was catching people off guard, because. But also, I like the fact that it might leave you for the rest of the day thinking, or maybe you hit dinner time. Oh no, well, you already passed dinner time, but maybe you wake up tomorrow and like, oh, actually, I wouldn't mind having dinner with this person or that person. But no, thank you. It's great to hear all sorts of range of answers from all my guests. And if we gotta play for a minute, and I don't know, we covered a little bit of water, we covered a little bit of science, but I just want to really thought about it last night when I was typing the questions. If we just play for a minute, I don't know, Rick and Morty style, really going macro. In an imaginary future, what are your predictions, or what can you see, or what can you think that we could be seeing in that kind of future in coffee?
In coffee? For me, it's a sort of like a 1 day, 1 week, 1 year, 10 years sort of projection. The 1 day thing for me, the 1 day prediction is that actually the specialty coffee industry has changed permanently based on our current climate. And this is going to mean that we're going to have to revisit, just even tomorrow, how we package what we think of as specialty coffee. And I know that that means doing a lot of online sales and subscriptions and making sure that coffee goes to your home and stuff. But that doesn't ensure that you have the experience that the roaster doesn't get to control the experience you have, nor should they, but they don't. So they have to reinvent what that means for specialty coffee tomorrow. In 1 week, it's hard to see in 1 week right now. COVID has changed the time scale for everything. So, while I can't make a prediction in 1 week as to what's going to happen, I'll tell you in 1 year, my hypothesis is that we're going to be going and revisiting things that we thought were definitely solid, definitely like the cornerstone of coffee. A few examples of those are and they're already being challenged by lots of people, but a few cornerstones are the production methods. So, whether you're processing in a certain way, you're fermenting in a certain way, these sorts of things are going to be examined heavily in 1 year. But also on the brew side, we see new products coming out every day, and they're incrementally changing certain aspects. But I think there's a lot of exciting stuff coming on the horizon. I'm also working on some new stuff, and I'll tell you a little bit about it in a second if you want. But we're excited about the future from a research perspective. So that's in 1 year, we think that. But in 10 years, so really in the future here, one of the challenges is that we, independent of whether you believe that the climate is changing or not, one of the realities is going to be that coffee is going to become less accessible, or prices will go up, or quality will change. Think about it however you want to think about it. But the reality is that in 10 years, there is going to be a notable difference between what we can obtain right now and what we'll obtain in 10 years. And that is a challenging problem to overcome with science. It's a challenging problem to overcome as a community. And so what I think is actually going to happen is there's going to be a lot more homogenization of coffee shops, because I think that major players are going to become more important again, for better or worse. But I think that, when the product becomes more scarce, who's going to have the money to actually go after this and drive the prices down to something that keeps coffee at a reasonable price? For better or worse, it's just a statement of fact. And, this could be, 10 shops in Melbourne, all of a sudden all are owned by the same person, and they're all roasted at the same facility, and they don't look like they're the same shops, and all the bags are different, but it's all one shop, that sort of thing.
I think that's, that makes a whole bunch of sense. I sort of kind of want to challenge a bit of just go a little bit sci-fi, but it's like, could you see potentially, not quite in 10 years, but would it be possible that humans will start looking at growing in lab production of coffee like they do with meat? Instead of beyond meat, it'll be beyond coffee. Let's just, for the sake of the exercise.
So welcome to Finca Hendon. We have this. Hold on. We got a couple more.
Finca Hendon, I love it.
Yeah. I like this one too. This guy's he's little, but he's strong. But look, yes, I got asked this question the other day from the National Academy of Sciences about whether there was opportunities for hydroponics of coffee. And because they were thinking, we can grow basically everything, so why can't we just grow coffee in a lab? Why can't we do this on a scale that was actually, hold on, there we are, on a scale that was viable to do in a laboratory setting? And sure, why not? It's a plant. We could do it.
That's interesting.
That's not that far fetched. What's more far fetched are these companies that are starting up that are making coffee out of not coffee. Right, there's a company right now that's doing molecular coffee, if you want to call it that. They're putting in chemicals into a mixture that tastes like coffee. That is interesting. That is also kind of not really why we drink coffee. So, I don't know the answer to that. I've been involved in like these tech company startups that are trying to make coffee more accessible or higher quality, whatever that means, or whatever. I've been involved in these things, and they're all innovative and they all bring something new to the coffee industry. And I think they're all good, and certainly beyond the ones that I'm part of. But I think at the same time, I also wonder, even with the ones that I'm part of, what is the innovation? Is the innovation future-proofing, or is it making it easier to taste? Or I don't know, like, what really are we doing here? Or is it something that doesn't really need to be fixed? Is it the variability and the fact that we get to enjoy it now and maybe climate will prevent it later on? Is just, maybe that's actually going to be political. Maybe that'll be the beginning of a major change that actually is really has a positive outcome. I don't know.
Yeah, and obviously it's such an interesting aspect, because I think purpose behind anything is such an important component. Purpose behind a new research, purpose behind a new experiment, and why are we doing what we're doing? It's important in any aspect of life, but also when it comes to science. Going back to that, I mean, yes, please, I'd love to hear what you've been working on, like you were just you briefly mentioned, because I'm always time cautious, because Instagram shuts it after 59 minutes and 59 seconds, and they don't give you any grace period. So please, the stage is yours.
How many minutes do we have left?
I think we've got about 12, which doesn't sound a lot, but from experience, I know it's not much.
So we've been at University of Oregon has given me the green light to build a coffee lab. So that means that things are going to get serious here, because now, instead of me doing the experiments in Maxwell's shop, which, a quick side note on that, the grinding paper where we froze the coffee and then ground the coffee at different temperatures, the one that I guess people are more familiar with now because of Kyle Ramage's routine and so forth. That paper, the data I collected, that was the 3 days before I left England to move to the United States. And Maxwell, I told him I was going to do it, and I didn't know that it would be so noisy. So I rolled in this device, and it was so noisy that he shut the shop, which, I mean, I didn't mean for that to happen, but he had to close the store down the whole day because of me, which is bad. But that's where that came from. So we were doing it literally in the front of his store. That's going to change. So we're going to have a facility. We're going to have this pretty interesting modular setup where we have an espresso machine and we have lab equipment. They can all be moved around on tables. And, I think that's going to be really fun. It's a lab, but it's going to be public. So it's going to be right in the middle of our atriums with no walls. So if people are going to be working there, it's going to be a new paradigm, I think, for education, because basically you're going to come up and say, hey, what are you working on? And the students will be trained appropriately to give you a coffee, but explain to you what the experiment was that they were working on. So you get to taste the experiment as it's happening. So, and it's going to be, we're going to be working on publishing all this stuff. So there's that. But then in addition to that, these things, we need to, gain some sort of money because we need to fund it, right? So basically, I'm in the middle of developing an outreach and basically soliciting funding so that I can get money into Oregon in large quantities, so we can actually have PhD students coming through under my supervision, but will actually be trained in analytical chemistry, but will actually be also trained in science communication. So I think that there's that. And, I see people's comments going by here. So this won't be a closed thing. Right, this will be an open environment. So you baristas who want to come over there and train or use the equipment or whatever, I mean, we're a public university. That means that as long as you make sure that you're safety trained, we can go right ahead and do such a thing. So that's the dream, right? That is my dream, is to have this facility that people look at and go, wow, that is the pinnacle of science, but also of coffee. In addition to that, there are some new scientific problems that I'm going after. So one of the problems that we're going after very recently was trying to understand in real time how we can analyze what's in a cup of coffee. Now, I know there are devices that exist that can maybe do something like this, but unfortunately, they can't tell you anything about quality. They can't tell you blueberry. They can't tell you anything about your perception of that coffee, right? So we are going after that problem. And the way I'm proposing we do it is we use real lab equipment, things like optical measurements, but not the ones that you're familiar with, and electricity, these sorts of things. And basically, the tools that I'm developing typically cost a lot of money. If you went to a lab supplier, you would spend $1,000 or so dollars. But I want to release blueprints for you in the coffee industry to build them yourself. So, and they'll be free. So the idea is that I'm going to give you the way to do the analysis, and then I'm going to roll out a chemistry class that is free that everyone takes, and they do the lab component. So now you actually are trained in chemistry, not in coffee. And then I'm going to show you how to apply it to coffee. And then that way you're going to be able to make real-time assessments, and we can all talk to each other in the appropriate language of what we've analyzed. And no more will we have this, no more will we be making statements about what percentage of the mass did we extract, because, that doesn't tell you if you like it or not.
It sounds, well, first of all, I'm just going to say, the comments are quite spot on. I do like what Anthony wrote, Hendon Coffee Lab, fourth way, and Carlos saying that he's in a postdoc. So I think it's super interesting, and I think what you're doing is creating access, and I think access is the next wave of business anyway. And obviously funding is such an important component, and even the fact that you want to give that access free. It sort of briefly reminded me of a documentary I watched not long ago about biohacking. I think it was called Biohackers or something. It was basically kids to play with genes and whatnot, which was like made accessible to the public. Obviously, we're talking about coffee, not changing color eyes of your dog, which is a bit different. I think it's super interesting that you're able to say, hey, you know what? There's a bit of a gap from, the laboratory and home brewers. Let's just bridge it and just say, hey, come over, let me show you. I'm super excited. I'm glad that I've asked you that question and you shared what you're working on.
Well, let me tell you about why this is so powerful, right? Is that this whole coronavirus thing highlighted that us as educators are really bad at teaching online. We are not capable of doing this. But you know what's the worst online class you can possibly take is a chemistry laboratory. Because how the heck are you going to do a chemistry laboratory when you're in your living room, right? So the dream is to develop a chemistry laboratory class where not only do you get to do the experiments still in your home, right? But you also get to build the instrument in your home, and it costs let's say $200 to do the whole thing. So then you also learn how the instrument works, so then you know why it doesn't work when it doesn't work. You then also understand everything about it. So that's the dream. So my goal is to roll this out for the coffee industry, who I know I've got the coffee industry's ear, but only because we work so hard together to make sure that we're working on relevant problems. But if I've got your ear, then you'll give me good feedback on how we can improve this process. Once we've got the coffee industry speaking this chemistry language, I take that program we've developed and we roll that out across you can imagine every university would want to have an online component of chemistry lab. It keeps the numbers down in the rooms. It ups the participation. It makes the educational outcomes higher. So that means that not only the coffee industry just changed the way that tertiary education works. And I don't think, this sounds like a fantasy, but it's really not a fantasy. Trust me, you all have already changed the way that tertiary education is working. Because every time I give a talk, people always want to hear about the coffee stuff. And it's that's crazy. Why would they want to hear about that? I'm doing all this other stuff. But that's what they want to hear about.
But I find it super fascinating, and I would be one of those people excited about to see what's next. Carlos mentioning a few things that I have no idea what he's saying. I guess you can do that with a benchtop NMR coupled with an LC column. That's definitely out of my league. But I think what you're doing is going back to what you said at the start, how the mission would be, the beauty of coffee, it's so different, and often people don't have the same experience. And some people are doing a little bit of things. I mean, Amy and Mathieu, now they're sending their coffees in a package with the exact same water. and the same recipe and the same grind, and it really, to kind of break that barrier. Because Matthew, when I interviewed him, he said that he loves coffee, but he hates it because he's frustrated how the fact that he's still chasing that, the reason, but he's chasing that perfect cup of coffee. And you sharing your knowledge so publicly and openly and selflessly, because it also means stripping yourself of your ego and go, hey, I'm humble. I just want to do a good thing for the broader audience, which you use the word broader at the start, referring to something else. But I think it's just, yeah, I'm very excited.
You have to have, I appreciate that you say that I'm humble, but I must be honest. You have to have some level of ego, because science is pretty brutal. It's brutal because people really give you feedback that's really hard. It's not like, okay, let me give you an example of the type of feedback. Let's say you work really hard, you present a beautiful coffee, and imagine that somebody, as soon as they taste it, told you exactly what they thought about it. So whether it's good or bad, but you get exactly what they think. So they could say, this is over extracted. I also didn't like the method that you used because it was irreproducible because of this. So basically that's what science is. Every time we do something, someone criticizes every facet of it. So you do have to have some degree of ego to be confident with the way you present it, but then be humble with being wrong. And so I'm glad that you can see that there is humility in some facet of this. But I also have to I have to present it in a certain way.
Sure.
You have to stand by what you. Yeah.
Definitely, and obviously it's you. There's your name, like 100%. And like you said, science is brutal because it is. But yeah, the fact that you're gonna have that as an open house is already, and even giving access. That's amazing. No, I get your point. Definitely. I couldn't, and that's why I couldn't be a scientist, because probably it would be quite frightening. But no, thank you. I wish the time was going slower.
How much time do we have?
We got about 90 seconds. It's just frustrating, and it'll bring me to something important for me to say. Thank you for being here. It was such a unique experience for myself as well, to hear another face of coffee and another story, another insight. And I'm very grateful for you being here. And I'm hoping, and I'm inviting already you, maybe we could do this again in a month or two, maybe in a different setting. Maybe we can work out a cool idea to do something a bit different in connection to a talk.
Well, I might have some really exciting news for you in a month. So maybe I'll check back in with you in a month. All right.
All right, let's do it. Yeah, excited. All right. Soon we're going to be given the 30 seconds countdown. Christopher, thank you so much. Truly grateful. I'm going to shoot you a message as soon as we finish this. Thank you. I really appreciate you being here. Honestly, it's great.
My pleasure. I just want to point out that if you do want to hear some more scientific content, go check out the Toby's Estate Knowledge Talk. It's on YouTube.
Oh yeah, all right. You know what? I'm gonna repost it on my stories so people will have context. 100%.
Cool.
My man. Right. Take it easy. You have a good night.
Thank you.
Cheers. Wow.
That was quite such an interesting, intriguing talk, and I was really trying to get as many seconds in as possible because there was so much things popping into my brain, and usually I try to get the last 5 minutes to be pen out so I can talk for 5 minutes solo to sort of say thank you, and it was just so much data and information. So I hope you appreciate this. I hope you liked it, and if you did, I'd love for you to just take a screenshot and sort of reshare this. If this grows, we'll be able to do it for longer and for more. Yeah, thank you. Big shout out to people who are still in the house. Obviously, we got Anthony, Brew Theory, we got Coffee Diaries, Vag. You've been silent, I didn't see you were here. Peter, Carlos, Dafu, Daniel, Kirk, Raman, and all of you. Thank you very much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Very, very grateful for you being here, as well as for Chris to be here, to have been here and talk to us. And I just got a big thank you to you. Stay safe, and I'll see you.